Well, in our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast, we're looking at Jesus Christ. We're considering Jesus, contemplating Jesus, pondering Jesus, trying to understand Jesus. And as we do that, we're looking at some of the titles that Scriptures ascribe to Him, and those titles help us get a handle on who Jesus really is. And yesterday we looked at the Logos, the Word of God, the communication of God to mankind. He's come to communicate to the world what God is like. That's the Logos. And He's the power behind all things in the universe. That's the Logos. Today we turn to one that is probably more familiar to us. We call Jesus Christ the Son of God all the time. But exactly why is that important, and what does that mean? And what does it tell us about Jesus, and what does it tell us about God? So we're looking again at Hebrews chapter 1. We tend to go back to that a lot here early on in our study. But there, in the book of Hebrews, if you are familiar with Hebrews, the Jewish people that whoever wrote this book was writing to were seemingly to be backing away from their profession of Christ. At least some of them were. They had made a profession of Christ, and many of them were saved. We're not sure if this is one single congregation or perhaps a number of congregations. We don't know, but it's written mainly to Jewish people. They had been steeped in Jewish tradition and history and so forth, and they'd come to Christ and they began to walk with Christ, and they progressed for a time. And then, for whatever reason, they seemed to get bored or distracted or whatever might have happened to them. And when they did that, they began to move further away from the centrality of Christ and the greatness of Christ. The writer of Hebrews is quite alarmed by that, because you cannot have Christianity without Christ being at the heart of that. And so he is talking to them, he's warning them, and he's also telling us, especially early on, how superior Christ is to everything else in the universe. And that's much of what he has to say in the early chapters. In chapter 1, he talks about the superiority of Christ over angels. In chapter 3, he begins to talk about the superiority of Christ over the great fathers of the Old Testament, in particular Moses. Jesus is superior to all other things and all other beings in the universe. He is vastly superior. And that is because of this title, the Son of God. He is not a created being. He is not like angels that were created by God. He is not like human beings that were created by God. He is not like anything else. He is uncreated. He has always existed, and he has always been God. He is, as the creeds say, he's very God of very God. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2, and Hebrews likes to use the term early on of the Son, it says, "In these last days God has spoken to us in His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, and through whom also He made the worlds." In these last days He's spoken to us in His Son. So there is something that only the Son could communicate to us. In verse 1, he says, "God, having spoken long ago in the fathers, in the prophets, and in many portions, in many ways." That's Old Testament revelation. So he said there was a time, there was an era in which the Lord spoke to His people through prophets, and He did it in many ways. So we have 39 books of the Old Testament that the Lord has given us that we can ponder and read and benefit from, and that Old Testament revelation that comes from God, inspired by God. But in these latter days, these latter times, He's spoken to us specifically through the Son, because the Son can tell us things no one else can because of who He is. He is the Son of God. In verse 5, he says, "For to which of the angels did He ever say, 'You are my Son, today I have begotten you. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me.'" So the angels that are magnificent and powerful and wonderful, they nevertheless are created beings. He never said to any of the angels that this day I have begotten you, because He has not. Begotten doesn't mean that He was born physically, like we think of someone being born. It means He is derived from God. He comes from God. He is connected with God. He is God Himself, and somehow in ways that are beyond our comprehension, He is uniquely the Son of God, and he derives who he is from God himself, the Father himself. Verse 8 says, but of the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. And so this one who is derived from God, the only begotten Son, he says his throne is forever and ever. What a magnificent picture we have of the Son of God. There's no one like him. And as we contemplate him, this is something that should bring us a wonderful day in the Lord. As we complete our first week of looking at Jesus Christ, may it give us a wonderful weekend in the Lord as we take time to think about him and consider who he is and what he has done.